Hey, what's up? I got some more lore content for you guys. Now that my beginner-friendly decks for each region series is done, I want to give more general tips for new players getting into Legends of Runeterra. I'm starting off with a guide to the lore terminology that you will often hear on my stream or on other channels. I wanted this video to be especially good for players without an extensive card game background. Before I get into the video, if you're new, please consider hitting the subscribe button to stay up to date with my content. We are on the journey to 10k subs. This is the only channel where you can get my specific style of content, so you won't regret subbing. I also stream on Twitch often, so check me out over there if you're looking for live gameplay of someone who's hit Master Tier every season, and even hit Rank 1 in NA a while back. With that, I hope you enjoyed this video. Okay, so I want to start off with the terms that are probably the most important, and the things you will hear the most often as a player, and that is deck-based terms. So what do I mean by that? I mean the style of decks that are most often played in Legends of Runeterra, this being aggro, control, combo, and midrange. Aggro basically means aggressive. It boils down to really fast strategies that want to whittle down the opponent's HP and take them out as soon as possible, giving you really quick games and really quick wins. A good example of an aggro deck, of course, would be spiders, which new players have access to right away, and it is something that should be very familiar to new players, and you can definitely see how the strategy can be considered aggressive, aka aggro. It just wants to put units on the board as fast as possible and deal as much damage as possible. You know what they say, if the opponent has 20 HP, we're going to bring 40 damage in our deck, and that's exactly what aggro decks like to do. Now, on the flip side of aggro, we have control, the absolute opposite. So the point of control is to use cards to stall out the game and try to get to some of the more late game or top end win conditions of the deck, things that usually take longer to turn on, but it is usually meant to control the opponent's board. This is where the word control comes from. So if the opponent is developing strategies and units, then the goal of the control deck is to take them out, using damage removal and sometimes unit-based removal as well, or other things of that nature. Now the third deck archetype is somewhere in the middle. Not quite aggro, not quite control, but has qualities of both. This is known as a mid-range deck. So mid-range is often controversial in terms of the specifics of it, but the way that I've always thought about mid-range decks is that it wants to have a strong mid-game finish, and it has a lot of pressure, turns like 4 through 7, which is the middle of the area of the game, not quite early with the 1s and the 3s, you know, and not quite late with the 8 costs or above. It's somewhere in the middle there, anywhere between 4 and 7 where the win conditions come online. Also, another interesting aspect of mid-range is that it can be teched, which means cards, you know, put in and out depending on the meta and depending on what is strong. So the deck can be teched in order to beat aggro and control matchups, which is really interesting. A good example of this is my mono Shadow Isles, which I've been running for a long time. So Shadow Isles is all about running the Wraith Caller and putting up mid-game pressure into Hecarim, and it also is able to run anti-aggro tools. Like, look, we have Vile Feast to heal and deal with pesky units. We can match other aggressive decks with our aggressive early game. And then we also have Withering Wail, so removal. And then in order to beat control, we just have a solid late game win condition, like Harrowing in, you know, a big Hecarim attack. The last deck archetype that I want to talk about is a combo deck. Now, combo basically boils down to needing 2, 3, 4, you know, X amount of cards in order to win the game outright, just, you know, by having the cards in your hand and playing them out. There are different variations of combo, and players often get confused and argue about combo control or combo aggro. That technically doesn't matter. What matters in terms of combo is the fact that it actually needs, you know, multiple specific cards in order to achieve its win condition. For example, Lee Sin needs to have Zenith Blade, needs to have Overwhelm so that he can do his combo attack. And he needs to have, you know, Sonic Wave and Twin Disciplines and things like that to bump him into the kill threshold that his combo requires. Whether or not that this is a control deck or an aggro deck doesn't technically matter because it is just a combo deck, right? There are other combo decks out there, like Azir Aurelia, way back in its prime, was known as an aggressive combo deck because you need Azir, you need Aurelia, you need a couple of the Blade Dance pieces. You need to acquire these cards in your hand in order to fulfill the win condition of the deck. That's what makes it combo. It requires specificity of cards. Another example would be Trundle Lysandra combo, which was also quite popular before the Watcher got nerfed. That was a control variant of combo. So this game is interesting because it not only has aggro combo, control combo, and then Lee Sin, which is like true combo. It's kind of like a little bit of both. It's more on the controlled side that it wants to stop your opponent from developing stuff, but it doesn't have any removal, so it's like a board-centric control style combo, right? It gets a little complicated. There's a lot of little niche things to pay attention to and to consider, but that's basically what it boils down to. Okay, there's one more quick term that I'd like to discuss, and that is burn. Burn itself specifically means burn cards that deal direct damage to the enemy face as a result of being a finisher card. So Noxian Fervor is one of the finisher cards in the game. Decimate, also the most popular finisher card in the game. Now, not all aggro decks are burn, but I would say all burn decks are aggro, right? That makes sense. But there is a distinct difference. You can run an aggro deck in this game without it being a burn deck. It just so happens that burn is the most popular strategy because Noxus is home to a lot of the best aggro cards. However, there is another deck that has existed in the past, known as Fearsome Aggro. Let me find it right here. Fearsome Aggro has no burn whatsoever. The win condition is to not burn your opponent, aside from maybe a little Doom Beast. That's more like Reach though, which is another term that I will explain later. So, instead of burn, the win condition of this deck is to play aggressively, but it's to beat over the opponent's units by having fearsome units that can't be blocked very easily and dealing direct damage that way instead of through spells. So I just wanted to highlight the ability to call something burn and what that technically means. If you hear someone saying, oh, I'm playing Bandle Burn, that means they're playing a Bandle City deck that also has Noxus with these Noxian finishers. Or if they're playing P and Z Burn, then that means they're playing the Piltover and Zon deck with burn finishers as well. And now, moving away from deck-specific terminology, I want to talk about more general terms that you will hear while watching Legends of Runeterra content. The first term I would like to cover is open attack. This basically means first action attack for the turn. So as soon as you get the attack token as the attack player for the next turn, the first thing you do before playing any other card is just attack. That's what it means. You basically open up the turn by attacking, hence the term open attack. The next term I want to talk about is floating mana. So this is when you pass a turn and you still have mana remaining and it gets banked for a future turn in the little 3 dots underneath your normal mana. This is your spell mana. So for example, if you hear a player say, I'm going to float 2 for next turn, that means they're going to purposefully not use 2 mana so that they can spend it as spell mana in a following turn. The next term I'd like to talk about is matching. So this is something I specifically say a lot. So when the opponent is going to cast a spell, or I assume they're going to cast a spell, like during combat specifically, and the opponent is going to cast something like Sharp Sight, I say, okay, I'm going to hold my card here. Like let's say I have my own Sharp Sight, or I have a combat trick that can fight against it and make it trade in my favor or equal, if that's what I want. I can say, okay, I'm going to attack here. If they have Sharp Sight, I will match it with my own, or I will match it with like my Twin Disciplines or my Pale Cascade or something of that nature. It basically just means if they have an out, I also have an out to that specific card. Alright, so combat trick is probably one of the most important and common terms you're ever going to hear in Legends of Runeterra. A combat trick is essentially a buff card in hand that can be used during combat, so often burst speed, in order to push combat in a player's favor. For example, Sharp Sight is probably one of the most common combat tricks you're ever going to see because it's just so strong. 2 mana 2/2, and it can trick combat into one player's favor. That's basically what it means. Just any kind of buff. Okay, so the next term, I haven't really heard that often anywhere else, but I say it a ton, and it's kind of a bad habit, but if players come to my channel and hear me say this, this is basically what it means. A naked card. So a naked card is essentially a card being played without any bonus effects. So for example, if I'm playing against Nightfall and I pressure them into using Pale Cascade without any previous cards being played for them, they're not going to get their Nightfall effect, right? So I call that a naked Pale. Same with if Diana comes down with no effect being played, it's called a naked Diana. I know it sounds weird and it's a little silly, but I've heard it in other card games before and other video games in general, so I kind of adopted the term and now I've been saying it for like the past 2 years of playing lore, and people question it all the time or say something about it, but yeah, that's basically what it means. Alright, the next term is curve. Now this is a super important term to learn. So curve is all about playing mana efficiently, right? So if you play or you open a hand and you see in your opening hand a 1-drop, a 2-drop, a 3-drop, and a 4-drop unit, it's like, oh wow, this is amazing. I can play each of those on each turn, and that is called playing on curve. That is your mana curve. And if you're able to play efficiently like that, then you're curving out. So that's basically what curve means. I'd like to add to that term by also adding the term tempo. Tempo is not only my name, but it's also a card game and video game term in general. So tempo basically means momentum. If you keep momentum, then you have tempo in that match. So if you're playing on curve, and this is the tie-in to the last term, then you are playing with tempo, essentially. You have really strong momentum each and every turn, and if your opponent is not matching that tempo or that curve, then you are outright beating them in terms of value, in terms of efficiency, in terms of board state, everything. The game is going in your favor if you have tempo and the opponent doesn't. The next term I want to talk about is one I just said as well. Value. Value is really, really important in Legends of Runeterra and card games in general. Value is basically how much a card can do for you and what it does for you. So cards that generate more cards gives you value because you're losing a card in your hand by playing it, but you're adding another one back. If your opponent is not doing the same, then you have outvalued them, right? And that makes sense. And if you build a big board of units and the opponent avalanches you and your entire hand and board is gone, then you just got omega outvalued by just one card. So it's all a resource thing. That's basically what value boils down to. Another quick term I'd like to talk about is trading up and trading down. This also ties into value. So like, let's say you have a 1-drop on the board and that trades into your opponent's 2-drop or higher, then that means you have traded up because you spent 1 mana and you used one of your 1 mana cards to beat a 2 mana card of your opponent, essentially netting you 1 mana of value over them. And conversely, if the opponent has to block your 1-drop with a 2-drop or higher, that means they're trading down. Obviously, as a player, you want to trade up or as even, as much as possible. You don't want to trade down. This keeps your value going, this keeps the tempo going, and that's how you eventually outvalue your opponents. This is especially important in expeditions, where there aren't a lot of super consistent win cons being played around. Instead, it's usually about generating board pressure, having a better hand state than your opponent, and outvaluing them. Reach is often used when talking about needing a little bit of damage to finish the game. For example, I need to find Doom Beast so I can reach lethal. So Doom Beast is a little bit of damage right here. It's sort of like burn. However, reach can also mean bigger damage spells, like Atrocity, for example, is a great reach card. So if you're playing deep and you need to find reach, or any of the old style Shadow Isles decks like Ledros stuff, Atrocity can help you reach lethal, which means winning the game. And for super new card game players, Mulligan is a phase at the beginning of the game where you get to take out certain cards from your hand in favor of finding better cards. You'll also hear the term pitch, like I'm going to pitch this card here and try to find something else. Here's a little bit more of a tricky term and concept. It is called burst passing. So the way Legends of Runeterra works is if you ever cast like an action or you play a spell, right, you play a unit, the initiative goes to your opponent and they're able to do something as a response to yours. However, there's an exception with burst speed spells. So burst speed spells can be used in one action, essentially. You can cast as many burst speed spells as you want and then attack or play something else, whatever you want to do. However, for some reason, there's an option to where if you cast a burst speed spell, you can also just pass the initiative to your opponent. Now, this is really cool if you have low-cost burst speed spells, and you can use it and just test what your opponent is trying to do. You can try to make them play below certain amounts of mana so that you don't get hit by certain cards that you're worried about, and just check their initiative while seeing like if they want to pass, if they want to play, or whatnot. It's a really interesting and amazing concept if fully utilized. And that's it for this one. I really wanted to choose terms that I hear and say often and ones that have been questioned by my own chat in order to educate you guys, get everyone caught up, whether you're a card game veteran or a new player, or you're trying to get someone into the game. Then I hope this video taught you something. You can learn anything from it. Please like and subscribe. In fact, if you thought this video was informative or entertaining, it really helps me out since I'm still trying to grow. I'll be releasing more deck profiles, guides, and gameplay highlights in the near future. Thank you so much for watching and have a good one. Laters.